Good morning, sixth graders. This week we start another unit. If you remember last week, we talked about glaciers and we talked about megafauna animals and the early part of Minnesota history. Now we're going to look at our state after the glaciers have gone through, and oh, we're going to study what the state really looks like today. So we're going to call this unit the geography of Minnesota. Just a few things. If you're going to study something, especially in history, very often geography is a very important part of that study. In order to understand the events in history, we need to really understand where the events occurred. And that's vital if we're studying battles or if we're studying a settlement or if we even zoom in, so to speak, and study how a city forms. Very often, that city and its formation is based on geography. So, for example, right here, I have a map of the Battle of Gettysburg, very, very famous battle during the Civil War. It's been referenced a couple times this summer and in the media. But to understand this battle, you could look at this topographic map of the battle itself, and you could see uh, these darker gray to black areas here, sort of in the middle of the map, were the hills in this region in this town of Gettysburg. And that is where the Union troops zoomed in first and got the best positions on top of these hills. Now, ordinarily, that is a great advantage. But in this particular case, the South uh, picked a couple spots on that line where it was, but the geography made it a little more difficult for the North to get troops there, and that made that part of the line cut off. And so, if you really study this battle, you'll see the geography played a vital role in how the battle ended up, which was a quote unquote win for the North. So, when we study geography, we have to study maps. Very often we get to create maps. So in my class, whenever we get a map or whenever we create a map, we need to do something called Todals. It's an acronym. Each of these letters on top stands for something on the map that we must put on there every single time. Good maps have these things because they give you all the information about the map if they have these elements. There's not parts missing. It just makes the map complete. So every map should have a title. Ideally, this title should give a very clear idea of what the map is about. So if you're making a map about Minnesota, then you would obviously say Minnesota map. If you're making a map about the Battle of Gettysburg, then that should be the title, Battle of Gettysburg. Some maps are much, much larger. They could be a map of North America. Other maps are much smaller and more detailed. They could be a map of, say, Minneapolis or a map of Jordan. But that title must be clear, and it's usually at the top of the map, easily visible, so there's no question what the map is about. That way, the person who's using the map can see, okay, this map is going to serve a purpose. This map is going to give me the information that I need. The next acronym letter is O for orientation. I think of this as the compass rose. This tells the reader which way the map should be facing if they're trying to use the information on the map. So very often you have the cardinal directions north, and south at the bottom, west on the left, east on the right. I always think of the acronym never eat soggy waffles. That tends to help students. We'll practice that skill a little bit more tomorrow because knowing which way maps face is a um, huge thing to know. My cat is caterwauling in the background. Please ignore it. Date. We need to know when the map was created. A month and year is usually good enough. There are some maps where you have to have the specific day. So maybe if you're talking about one of the 3 days of the Battle of Gettysburg, but for our purposes, usually just the month and the year is good enough. The author. The author is the person or the company who created the map. So, for example, here at the bottom, I say map created by Aaron Gorath or map by Rand McNally. Sometimes there'll be an internet site. Whatever the case is, if you're using that map yourself or if you're making that map, then you still need to have an author down there signifying or telling who created it. Legend. Very often the biggest part of the map, but it's so vital because it tells what each of the symbols on the map mean. Right? If there's black dots on the map and there's not a legend, you can't tell what those black dots mean. Or you could guess and you might get it wrong. So here's an example of a legend here, where you have symbols for campgrounds, for picnic areas, for a gravel road, for a highway and the main highway, watered forest. Those symbols tell you what all the pictures on the map mean. Scale. Scale is a little bit complicated, and very often I will just give this to you. But scale is a ratio, a word in math that you'll hear later on, but a ratio of the distance on the map, the paper map, in relation to the distance on the ground, the actual distance on the ground. So you can see down here that there's a scale. There's one in kilometers, and then there's a simpler one here in miles. So you could physically take a ruler, and if you were to measure this distance on the map from here to here, you would know that that's actually 100 miles on the ground. So it looks like about 2 inches to me. That would equal 100 miles on your map. Now, this is not perfect. And in this day and age, when we have GPS, scale isn't quite as important because there's nothing that you can't measure on a map with Google Maps. It still is handy just to estimate distances really quickly. So to wrap it all up, here is an example of a map with all the Todals elements on there. We've got the title at the top. Okay, ideally it should be more centered, but this is just how this map was. The orientation, which is that compass rose, north, south, east, and west. You've got the date sandwiched down here in the corner. Usually, the bottom part of the map is the date. The author who created the map right here. Legend. It tells what all the symbols on the map means. And then finally, scale right here. Now, if you're lucky, your map has all this space, and you can put the legend and orientation off on the edge. But in some cases, you don't have that luxury, and you'll have to put that stuff within your map, and so you need to choose carefully. So I found this ridiculous little video made by a teacher, and this guy in his class is just reviewing Todalis. So let's just go ahead and watch this and try to remember some of the stuff that I've been talking about so that you can hear it twice and hopefully it'll become more cemented in your brain.
Hey, Mr. M, what are we doing today?
I can't read a map, I don't know what these objects are. I can't read a map, what's the box in the corner for? I can't read a map, I don't know which way this should go. I can't read a map, man, I guess I'll just have to learn. There are 5 map features. First the title, which is on the top, borders on the sides, don't forget about the compass. There are 5 map features. Compass reads northeast, south, and west. Don't forget the key we use to scale the measure distance. I'm learning how to read a map. I'm learning how to read a map. learning. I'm learning how to read a map. I can read a map. Key tells us what we need to know. I can read a map. The title tells us what it's all about. I can read a map. The compass tells us which direction we'll go. I can read a map. I've learned a lot. I think I'm almost through. We've got 5 map features. First, the title, which is on the top. Borders on the side. Don't forget about the compass. We've got 5 map features. Compass reads on east, south, and west. Don't forget the key we use to scale the measure distance. Learning how to read a map. Learning. I'm learning how to read a map. Learning. I'm learning how to read a map. Gonna make you read. Gonna make you read. You know who I am? Mr. M. Gonna make you read. Gonna make you read. You know who I am? Mr. M. Mr. M. Mr. M. Mr. M. I'm learning how to read a map. Learning. I'm learning how to read a map. Learning. I'm learning.
All right, that got a little redundant, but still, the main point still holds. Those 5 features. If you'll notice in his song or their production there, they used the word key instead of the word legend. And honestly, that is not a bad synonym for that word. A key and legend are essentially the same thing. So after this, I will add that to it so you can remember that. But key and legend. So after watching this, we're going to do a little practicing. And this is going to be with the class. Now, if you go to Google Classroom for today, there's a doc there called Todals Practice. Now, this is mostly for the adults and the JVA kids. What you're going to have to do, teachers, adults, is open it up, make a copy of it, and then complete it with the class. Now, I'll show you just a second. When we're all done with this and you feel like the students have a good handle on Todals, it's not a complicated thing, they can work on their Big 5 or silent read. Students, please be aware that at some point before MEA, probably that week of MEA, there'll be a little quiz or test on your states and capitals. So be doing a good job with those. Try and review as often as you can, especially the states. You need to know the location of the states. That's really, really important. So, teachers, for the classwork for today, it would be under Todals Elements right here. And then there is going to be 3 things here. There's going to be the video. There's going to be a copy of the PowerPoint that I talked on. And then there's going to be a link to a Google document. It'll be a read-only. You'll have to make a copy of it to complete that Google Doc with the class. Tomorrow, we're going to start map construction. So it is imperative or vital that you have colored pencils along with you tomorrow so that we can start to work on this rather large map that we're going to do. I will give you very specific instructions, but if you don't have colors, colored pencils especially, this will be a difficult task. So I will change the words misspelled geography word here, and I will talk to you again on Tuesday. Have a great day.